Hi. There have been quite a few reviews around public bodies. Some of those tailored reviews, some of those tyrannical reviews. It'd be interesting to know what effect you think any of these reviews have actually had on the public bodies landscape. And one of the reasons that I asked that question again is, and this is a question for you, is why haven't more been closed as a result of them? So there is a general feeling that some aren't meeting the needs and the purpose, especially of what they were originally put there to do. So if these reviews are taking place, what actually is the effectiveness of these reviews?
I think I agree that reviews have not been a consistently useful approach and measure for evaluating the kind of condition of public bodies and whether they should continue to exist and how. Equally, it's difficult to imagine a process for doing that consistently across the whole of the public body landscape, which doesn't involve some level of standardization about, what the process is and how it's executed. I think where the reviews have failed has been when they are done because it's the kind of your time has come round and it's your turn to review one of your public bodies, and the department, the public body, the cabinet office, the treasury, everyone in the ministers involved are just kind of going through the motions of it, because although the process is very clear on paper in the guidance around the process, around the review process, that the conclusions of these meant to be taken very seriously. The reality is that closing a public body, merging it, bringing it back in-house, or other big strategic decisions about its ambit are big, very political decisions that would require ministers to do quite a lot of work building kind of a consensus among some of their colleagues, being willing to advocate publicly for the result. And the process is quite a kind of bureaucratic, officials-led one, which in reality focuses a lot on, are public bodies complying with their duties under managing public money, for example, and other core bits of guidance. And so that a process like that can produce lots of helpful official recommendations, often some of which are not particularly implemented or used. But the kind of big decisions you're talking about around should we close some more of these public bodies, I think need a longer political lead-in and a clearer desire from ministers to say, well, we think we know which the blockers are, as the government has talked about, the liaison committee, the speech back in March last year from the Prime Minister. And we have our own theory of that, so we're kind of, whether it's through the review process or outside of that, driving that to its natural conclusion, as they have done with NHS England. I mean, it's going to be a lengthy process, no doubt, to bring it back in-house, but there's a kind of theory there and a practice of it which wasn't born out of a particular tailored review or the current review process. They just had identified a problem and wanted to do it. I think it's very hard, absent that, for a quite official-led review which is going through the motions to come out with something that big.
Can I just go back to the NHS England element with that, because you've mentioned it a couple of times. With regards to the NHS England, then, there are other public bodies that surround that. We've got the Care Quality Commission, we've got the National Medical Council, all of which have been heavily criticised recently. The NMC as well, heavily criticised. There is an ongoing argument that they all are linked with regards to NHS England. Are reviews more effective when we pull everything together, for example, health? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because we've done NHS England, and we've a big sweeping decision about NHS England, but around that are other public bodies where a lot of people feel, I'm not saying this is correct, but a lot of people feel that they aren't doing necessarily what they were set out to do in the first place, because they are essentially scrutinising themselves. Does getting rid of NHS England, dismantling it, actually resolve a problem if we don't look at those other public bodies that feed into it?
Great question. I think this comes down to the tricky question of prioritisation and trade-offs. Like, if we think the Cabinet Office it's currently constructed, even in a kind of more ideal state with significantly more resourcing, probably can't do everything all at once. Where should it focus its attention? You could definitely take a sectoral approach, and I think particularly when it comes to the health regulators, of which they do have complex overlapping responsibilities, you would need to think of them as a whole. I think you probably restate as reform as it was then, have advocated for bringing NHS England back in-house and then regionalising more of healthcare delivery for quite some time in several research papers. And we think that you can take some of those decisions in a kind of quite standalone way, but I would say when it comes to regulators in particular sectors where they overlap, that's a key example of where you do need to take those decisions as a whole. But actually, if we're talking about prioritisation, I think the government needs to make those decisions not based on a kind of the neatest possible sector by sector approach, but actually by where its core political priorities and delivery priorities are and what the right approach to that is. Yeah, we've argued, for example, and I think a key area of focus would be bringing Homes England back in-house as part of the delivery agency for such a key, high-profile, publicly recognised more commitment around home building. That would be a great example where the government should focus next, but which isn't clearly following the NHS England example.
Thank you. The government, as you will be aware, launched its own review programme early in the year based around 4 principles for arm's length bodies. What is your view of these, and is it actually an improvement on the 3 tests that was previously used? Will the application of the principles bring about the greater change that we really require in that landscape?
So, my understanding is that the new principles don't replace the tests, but will operate alongside the tests, and the Cabinet Office are going to have a bit of a think about whether or not they would change the tests to incorporate more of the principles.
It's accretion again, isn't it?
Yes. I think that the tests, as we've already discussed, and I won't labour the point, themselves probably were too broad, and actually by simplifying the tests and saying that the kind of technical function test is no longer a useful test for whether something should be an arm's length body, that would be the single most helpful way of kind of limiting the scope and making this exercise easier. Having said that, the addition of some of the principles I think is welcome. I would particularly enjoy and support the principle that stakeholder engagement is no longer a sole rationale for the creation of a public body, because as far as I can see, that's been the rationale for the creation of a very large number of public bodies and the continued creation of many more under this government. But I think until we actually are willing to reduce the number of tests and codify some of these principles as kind of anti-tests or things that they have to prove they're definitely not doing before creating a public body, the process probably won't change that much. I think alongside that, obviously, you have in their review programme, you have the tests and the principles and then the actual practice of it. And given this is being done at the same time, the Cabinet Office is shrinking and a lot of resource and expertise is being hollowed out of the Cabinet Office, I'm pessimistic about the government's ability to really deliver the review programme as it's set out. I think that it will be very dependent on individual departments, like wherewithal, desire to get involved in this, feeling that they have the kind of political support to close public bodies, to bring them back in-house. Historic evidence is to the contrary of that. So I would be surprised if with new principles, the programme is kind of delivered as planned.